The Organization dialog box, found under the Tools menu, is used very much for what it's named. Here you can manage the document structure of your project. The dialog is divided into a number of different tabs, depending upon what modules of Vectorworks you currently have installed. All users will see classes, design layers, sheet layers, viewports, saved views, and references. If you have Architect or Designer, you'll also see the Stories tab. The functionality of this palette can also be accessed via the Navigation palette in all Design Series modules as well. The Classes tab allows you to see a list of all classes currently in the document. This is the clearest view of classes organized with compound names. On the bottom right, you'll see a control for how the classes are displayed, either in the newer collapsible format or the previous left-aligned list. On the left, you have the visibility controls where you set the state of each individual class. The settings are visible, invisible, and gray from left to right. Immediately to the right of the visibility column is an unnamed column for selecting the current active class. The class that has a check mark is the currently active class. There can only be one class active at a time. Next is class name. Clicking Edit allows you to change it. The only other thing here that requires explanation is that to create collapsible classes, you simply add a hyphen into the name. For example, naming two classes wall-exterior and walls-interior. Additional dashes will create additional levels. You can create up to 3 levels of collapsible groupings. The Use column refers to whether or not the class has been set to use its attributes at creation, which means that any object drawn in or added to this class will automatically take on the class's attributes. N when it's disabled, Y when it's enabled. Fill, pen, line thickness, and marker are quick representations of the attributes applied to that particular class. These can be changed to any type of fill or color you like at any time, of course, again via the Edit button. Opacity controls the opacity of any 2D planar object in the entire class. This is separate from layer and object-based opacity. Keep in mind, you'll only be able to alter this if Quartz or GDI imaging is enabled in Vectorworks preferences. At the bottom, you'll see the standard buttons available in most of the tabs in this dialog box. New allows you to create a new class. Edit allows you to edit the currently highlighted class or classes. You can select multiple classes and then click Edit to change them all at once. Duplicate will make a copy of the currently highlighted class with a sequential number added after the name. Delete allows you to remove the selected class or classes. Preview lets you see the changes you've made in the background, normally used to see changed attributes. If you hit Cancel instead of OK, all your changes will disappear and the document will revert back to exactly as it was before opening the dialog box. The same will occur if you press Escape on your keyboard. The Design Layers tab functions similarly to the Classes tab. Visibility controls on the left, Active Layer column, Name column. The next column over, however, marked by a pound sign, requires some explaining. This is the stacking order of each particular layer in 2D. This stacking order does not affect 3D views. The layer with the number 1 will be stacked at the top, with each progressively higher stacking number being stacked that place lower in the list. To change this stacking order, simply hover over the layer's stacking number until you see a small tab appear attached to your cursor. Click on the layer's stacking number and drag it to the spot you wish it to reside in. Dragging it to the top will place this layer on top of all the other layers in 2D. Dragging it to the bottom will place it on the bottom. You can also change the stacking order by selecting the design layer and clicking Edit, then changing the stacking order number manually. This column displays the scale set for each layer. By default, this will be 1:1. The scale can be changed by selecting the layer and clicking the Edit button, but this will be covered in more detail in another video centered around working with scales. What story each layer resides on, if any, as well as what level type the layer is on that story, are listed here, as well as elevation and wall height. These, as well as the Story tab itself, will also be covered in more detail in another video, concentrating on design layers and stories specifically. The sheet layers in this document will be listed here. The sheet's number and title first, followed by the stacking order, which works the same as it does for design layers. The next column displays the DPI of the particular sheet layer. DPI stands for dots per inch, a way of measuring resolution on screen and on paper. The default setting of 72 is fine for quick previews, or 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, but normally you'll want to increase this to 150 or 300. Keep in mind that any viewports on sheet layers with higher DPIs will take longer to render due to the increased detail. Each sheet layer can have its own individual DPI as well as page size. X and Y allow you to manually set the center of these sheet layers' page area. This, like the other settings, is controlled on a per sheet basis. The Viewports tab lists all design layer viewports as well as sheet layer viewports. What layer they are on is listed here, along with an icon indicating whether the viewport is a design layer viewport or a sheet layer viewport. Source indicates whether the viewport is of objects in this document or if it's referencing another Vectorworks file. This column displays whether the viewport is a section or normal viewport. The next columns display whether the viewport is 2D or 3D, the scale of the viewport, and the render mode it is currently set to. The rest of these columns are general properties of viewports, which will be covered in a viewport-specific video. This tab simply lists all saved views in the file and their basic attributes in a more detailed view than you would see in the View Saved View drop-down menu by itself. It's also an easier interface for making multiple changes to multiple saved views without having to manually enter each one and saving changes over top of themselves each time. The final tab displays references of all types for the currently open document. This can include standard VWX files, as well as the referenced PDFs and other formats. If the names of these objects appear in red, it means that changes have been made to that file since the last time the reference was updated. You can either have the references set to update automatically, indicated by the Auto column, or you can do it yourself, manually, via the Update button below. How files are referenced into this document can be controlled by clicking the Settings button. Here you can choose what kind of updating you want for this file, as well as what kind of references you want. The difference between design layer viewports and layer imports will be covered in a video on design layer viewports specifically. At the top right of this palette, you'll notice the most often forgotten feature of the organization dialog box. Up until now, we've been in Details mode, which allows manual control of each of the contents of the various tabs. However, when we switch to Visibilities, we can see where and how each of these items is displayed throughout the whole file. For classes, I see first the list of viewports that it's present in, followed by the list of saved views. Here I can control the selected class's visibility across all viewports and saved views without having to manually hunt them down. The same is true for layers. This mode is most convenient when you wish to hide a certain class or layer across your entire document, or if you suddenly have to add a new class or layer and you want to enable its visibility on viewports or saved views that have disabled it by default, since they were created prior to the addition of this class or layer. The organization dialog box has links to nearly every aspect of your document. The dialog itself is fairly straightforward now that you understand what it's used for, but many concepts were left out of this video so that they could be covered in more detail one at a time. Please take the opportunity to view the additional material as well. It is integral to the effective and efficient use of Vectorworks.